What's up, Cougar Nation, and welcome again aboard the Hype Train podcast. I'm your host, that's at Joey27 on Twitter. As always, my boy Trevor Levitt, and special guest today, we got Hema Heimuli. I don't even know where to go with your bio, man. One of the royal families of BYU football. It's got to be close to it's at least two generations of Heimulis have played for BYU. Looking for a third once your kids grow up. Hema, give us a little bit of your bio and your background.
What's up, gentlemen? I'm excited to be here. Background, as far as background goes, I don't know. You pretty much covered it. I would say, we're a big BYU family, us Heimulis. I would
As he has 15 jerseys and helmets behind him.
I would slot us. I think we're underneath the Kofusis, but I think we're pretty high up there. We're not quite at Kofusi level, but we're pretty close. Yeah, I work currently for BYU TV. I produce the pregame and postgame shows for football and basketball, as well as do the coaches shows for Colani and now Kevin Young. And so, I love BYU sports. I love BYU football. It's in my blood. I've loved it ever since I was a little boy. I don't know. I like to have fun on Twitter. I gotta tell you, there's so many times where I'm in the wild and people are like, "Hema, I follow you on Twitter," and I'm like, "I'm so sorry." Especially if they're with their moms or like their wives or something. I'm very sorry about that. But
I do the same thing. I totally get that.
I like to have fun, and I like to say what I think, and so I think that's just a little bit of who I am. But I'm all aboard the hype train. I've drunk in the blue Kool-Aid, guys. This team is really fun to watch. They're special, and so I'm excited to talk about
it. You're coming in at the right time, and it's also got to be nice being so valuable at your job that whenever my boss comes up to me and goes, "Joe, I saw this thing that you tweeted," and my first thought is, "Oh no, this is the one."
I got to tell you, that happens all the time. I've shaken a couple of trees at BYU. I wouldn't say I'm like the quintessential hire at BYU. I think I'm a little bit different. But my bosses, I try to keep things honest without being too over the top. And if I start getting towards that line, my bosses, they remind me of certain things. But I quote that old Book of Mormon video that we all watched in seminary. That is, you knew what I was when you picked me up, and so you can't really expect anything else. So
I love it.
I'm going to use this as just a shameless plug to if you weren't aware, we're on YouTube now. You can see us in all of our glory. Go over there and subscribe so you can see what a BYU man cave is supposed to look like. I'm in my beginning stages, right? I've got my Zach Wilson helmet. We've got my diploma there, adding things in as we go. Joe's got his stuff, and then there's what I aspire to be in Hema's background.
No, your guys' setups look awesome. You guys are great.
Not even close. What's your favorite piece of memorabilia that you got hanging on the wall behind
you? Let's see. So I've got so both of these are my brother's jerseys. Houston when he played here. I don't know. There's this. I don't know if you can see. I'm turned around. I got a Mad Mac poster that I had on my wall growing up because my dad, after he left BYU, he played for the Bears for a little while, and so I followed the Bears for a little bit. But I have a Mad Mac poster, an original '80s Mad Mac poster signed by Jim McMahon. That's probably my favorite thing. But then I got a bunch of other stuff over here. Wait, nope, right there. That is an old black and white photo of my dad. And I actually got it from Coach Mel Olson, who was a coach on that 84 team. We had an event in March, and Mel came in with a bunch of old photos and stuff for all the 84 team members that were there. And he brought that for me of my dad. And so I thought that was pretty cool. But I don't know, man, there's a lot of junk on my walls.
So cool. It's so awesome. I'm geeking out over here.
How dare you call that junk?
It's a lot of stuff. I mean, I have other stuff in boxes and like stuff at my office at BYU TV as well. So,
That's
my wife's a
incredible.
big BYU fan, thank goodness. Like, because that's the only reason why any of this stuff can make it on the walls. So,
Oh, dude, I see my wife is also a BYU fan. We just put up some shelves in kind of our main room, and I snuck in. I haven't from one of the fan fests. I got an autograph football from like the 2022 team, so it's got like Jaron, Max Tooley, that whole squad. And I tried to sneak it onto the shelf while she wasn't looking, and I sent a picture to the group chat and was like, "How long before you think she notices?" And she immediately
minute.
walks in and goes, "What is that doing there?"
It's a sixth sense that they have. Like
Yes.
you don't even have to
1000%.
see it. They just feel that something's out of place. Something's not white and beige, so they sense it, right?
Yeah,
Anyways.
this was the only room in the house I got to decorate, so it kind of looks like I'm trying to make it look like Cougar Canyon just like threw up in my
Nice.
in my office. But uh,
Dang.
man, what a time, man! What a time to be a BYU fan! What a time to be alive! I kind of tweeted it out the other day. Like, I think yesterday might have been the best day I've had as a fan since that Big 12 invite came and then they beat Utah in the next 24 hours. I don't know what the second or like what the third best would be, but like hosting Big Noon Kickoff and then blowing the doors off of Arizona in that window, that's about as good as it gets. And then we factor in all the things that happened Friday night, and we can maybe, but at the request of my mother, I promised I would not make this a Ute hate show today. But wanted to get your guys' take. Like, where does yesterday rank on your all-time moments as a BYU fan?
Yeah, it's up there. Like I think what really kicked it off for me, you just brought up your wife. My wife is like, bless her heart, she's seen over the last couple of years how big of a BYU fan that I am, and has, at my request over the last couple months, she's like, "Man, you're doing the podcast and you're doing all these things," and she's like, "I just don't feel like I'm as connected to it as I should be." And so she's like set aside a day every week to listen to our podcast, and then she texts me about it, which I love. But I brought up this Big Noon Kickoff thing, and I was like, this game's at 2:00, so Big Noon Kickoff's going to start off pretty early. We don't have to go, but like I feel like that would be something that would be kind of cool for the kids to see. I put it on the kids. Obviously, I was the one that wanted to go the most, right? Let's be honest here. But she, just kind of out of the blue, she's like, "Okay, like when are we getting up so we can get there on time?" And we live in Bountiful. It's like a good, 15 minutes away, so it was a bit of a time commitment. And we got everybody up and we headed down there, and just seeing guys like Joel Klatt there and like Mark Ingram, who I grew up watching, like he was kind of the one that ushered in, I guess, this golden era of Alabama football, like having him talk about like so positively BYU, and then Cosmo walks by and he's waving at my kids. My kids' day's already made. That was special seeing like the band there. You've got all sorts of just fans with signs. Some, if you're on Twitter, makes sense with like the 5-layer burrito. Like otherwise, you have no idea what that's doing there. And just having these people that you've like just being a college football fan, having them be there and just speak so positively about BYU, and not only have them actually speak positively about BYU, but for BYU to then turn around and actually validate all of that was fantastic. Like that's something that like the previous college game days, we just didn't have that. Like we had guys speaking positively. You've got, they're throwing on like the Cosmo mascot head, and everything there is hilarious and it's awesome. But then we go get blown out by TCU. Like it seemed to be, we had one half of it and then we could never finish on the other side of it. And today, and I shouldn't say today, Saturday, the boys took care of business, right? And I think that's what makes all of this so fun, is that you've got guys on Twitter that are writing checks and the teams are cashing them, and it made yesterday a ton of fun. Sitting next to Johnny Linehan's right next to us, like it's just a great day. Like I just love being a BYU fan. It's been a fantastic first 7 weeks of football.
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain to figure out like when was the last time there was this much hype and like enjoyment. Um, 2021 rings a lot of bells, but I just feel like okay, I kind of want to lean into the question that you guys mentioned about connectivity, right? Like Trevor, you said your wife like didn't feel connected or whatever, and that stuff happens, right? Like um through different coaches and like eras of football, and eras of our lives, like sometimes we lose that connectivity. But I really feel like, you know, end of the Bronco era, even though like we were winning, there still wasn't a super big connection, I don't think. And I'm speaking purely for myself. I'm sure maybe there's other people that feel differently. But like our family, um, we didn't really feel connected back with BYU until Kalani became the head coach of the program. Um, and Colani started doing things, talking about BYU being like more of a family, love and learn, and all that stuff, like all the bumper sticker things. The most enjoyable thing recently that I enjoyed, like, was Saturdays. It was homecoming, but if you looked on the sidelines, it was packed. There was like no room to stand anywhere because so many people were coming back for homecoming. We're talking OGs like Elder Gifford Nilsson. We're talking NFL guys like Puka and Fred Warner. Like these guys all came back for this one game, put down their personal businesses and all the things that are on their calendars to come back to little old Provo, right? And you could say it's the hype, you could say it's big noon coming, you could say it's homecoming, but like I honestly feel like people are more connected to this team now, players, alumni, fans, and I think that Kalani is a big part of that. And so I think we're just kind of seeing the fruits of like a long time coming, right? I was at KSL in 2017, and we would do breakdowns every Sunday of each team, BYU, Utah, and Utah State. And at one point in 2017, we stopped doing BYU breakdowns because there was literally nothing to break down. And as a BYU fan, that hurt. It was awful to watch, but growing pains happen, and now we're seeing the fruits of like the program underneath Kalani Sitake and like people buy into it. And so I would say that this is pretty unprecedented. I think BYU is on a trajectory that no one foresaw, or if we did foresee it, we didn't think it would come this quickly and this soon, right? And so
Yeah,
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I think that's where I'm at. Like I expected this to happen at some point. I didn't expect this to happen now. Like we don't really appreciate how hard it is to go 6-0. Like my attitude this entire season so far has just been like enjoy the hype while you can, because it doesn't necessarily last forever. And like don't let the fear of failure get in the way of a good time. But like it's getting to the point where like my fear of failure even is just like diminishing, because again this team just keeps meeting the moment. But to your point, Hems, like one of the like in regards to the connection, one of the things I love most about this BYU football season is all of a sudden it feels cool to be a BYU fan again. Where I'm walking the streets of, like walking around Utah County all of Saturday everywhere, like American Fork, Lehigh, Orem, Provo. Someone is wearing a BYU piece of gear within eyesight. Like that is not something I've seen for years, to be honest with you. Like I don't think I've seen it since I've lived here, or like going to the gym or something like that. And like most of the gear I see is Utah gear, to be honest with you. Like Utah has been the cool team to follow. Like losing the youth, like what is happening to the younger generation and all the high school kids who think Utah is the cool school to go to. But then all of a sudden you turn on a BYU football game and you got Puka Nacua and Fred Warner trolling the sidelines wearing their BYU gear. You got Zach Wilson wearing the BYU gear. You got Woj on the sideline for the Kansas State game. You got AJ DeBansa, who's a future NBA star and BYU star, on the sidelines. Like it's just like the vibe around the team. The vibe around the team right now is, so someone mentioned it. Like I think Hunter tweeted out on the Hype Train account, is like, is this what it felt like to root for BYU in the 80s and 90s? And like but it kind of feels that way, where it's just like it just feels like a resurgence of BYU football. But you kind of said it before the game when we were chatting, Hema, that like winning solves a lot. Like that's the culture hasn't changed. The coaching, like people are going to chalk this up to, oh, Jay Hill, like just him coming in has like completely fixed the football team. Like Jay Hill has played a big part in that, but it's not just Jay Hill. Like the defense has obviously made huge strides, but the offense has also made huge strides. Like last year, BYU had the 100th ranked offense in the country in terms of scoring. Right now, they're in the top 25 in scoring. And so it's not just the defense, like the offense is bought in, special teams. We have a kickoff return and a punt return for a touchdown for the first time in 10 years. We got Sam Vanderhaar having one of the longest rushes of the season as a punter. Like just things just feel so good around the BYU football program. And it's like, I don't know, I kind of wanted to get this later, but like before the season, we were talking about coaches potentially losing their jobs. What is the job security of the coaching staff at this point, in your opinion?
I think they're solid. Like you mentioned, winning solves everything. Winning hides a lot of things, right? I think we saw at the end of the Zach Wilson era when we were winning a lot. The next few years, like we had some heartbreaking losses and some inexplicable things happened during games where we're like, well, maybe Tyler Algier was just a really special running back, like maybe he was a one in a millennium talent, and like we started kind of tooling our expectations. But I think there's ebbs and flows to things, and I think coaches do learn. Like people forget, like as much as we might criticize some choices that are made, like with the coaching staff and things like that, like they're still human and they also learn. So like, sometimes people take longer to learn than others, and I think we're starting to see like a lot of the fruits of that learning and that downward curve that's kind of trending upwards right now. So yeah, I just think it's a fun time to watch the progress of this team. I think, okay, start of the season, right? Let's talk about expectations shifting just for a second, all right? Because I want to hear what you guys think. I'm not gonna lie, at the beginning of the season, I was like, okay, 4 wins, maybe. And then let's see if we can scrape together 2 more to go bowling. I thought bowling was the goal for this 2024 season. Then like slowly, week by week, I started seeing, maybe we could actually go bowling sooner than that. And then teams in the Big 12 didn't look as intimidating as they did before. And now, I don't know, man, my expectations have shifted from bowling to like, we could go to the championship, like it's really possible if things keep shaking out the way they are. How have your guys' expectations shifted from the preseason, beginning of the season to current?
So I always kind of laugh at this where BYU fans, like their expectations are always 6-6, or sorry, their expectations are always 6 wins, but it's 6 wins from right now. Where like you win 1 game and it's like, oh, this team looks pretty good. Like I think 7 wins is on the table. You get to 3 wins. It's like, oh man, 9 wins. Like I think like I saw after BYU beat Wyoming, I saw someone say anything less than 9-3 would be a disappointment.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hilarious. But like at this point, like I think Saturday, my goal was always bowl eligibility, right? Like in order for the coaching staff to keep their job, like to stay intact as is, I felt like the coaching staff needed to make a bowl game this year. They did that in 6 games. And so now like the Arizona game became the point where this stopped being kind of like a cute story that they talk about on College Game Day of like, oh, like how awesome BYU's 5-0 for the first time since 2021. And, oh, like look at Indiana and like all these unpredictable 5-0 starts, like beating Arizona the way that they did, like that was a butt whooping. And that was a game that BYU was favored in. It was a game that people expected BYU to come through. And it's a game that historically BYU has not come through. And so again, I think and to win in the dominant fashion that they did, it moved the line for me where this is no longer just a cute story before eventually regressing to the mean. I think the mean now is like, especially looking at the rest of the schedule, I do think 9-3 could be a little bit of a disappointment. Like I mean, like Oklahoma State, that's a really winnable game. UCF.
Well, yeah. Now we're counting the losses, right? Like that's where, like
Like-
pregame, we were counting the preseason, we were counting the wins. Now
Well,
we're counting the losses. Like, where are we going to drop a game? If we drop it here, Oklahoma State at home at night, that's going to be a terrible loss. You know.
Yeah.
Now UCF, like that might be a terrible loss if we lost that one. Like it's just changing expectations. It's crazy, right?
Well, and I just like I don't, and that's the thing. Like I think BYU is going to lose a game or two at some point. Like it's hard for me to expect that BYU is actually going to go 12-0, you know, this season, even though we predicted it on the podcast. What do you want from the hype train? But like at some point, BYU is probably going to lose a game. But like before the season, to your point, Hema, like I was predicting 6 wins, but I didn't know what those 6 wins were going to be. Just based off of the talent. I walked into that SIU game thinking, man, BYU's never lost to an FCS opponent. If there was ever a year, this would probably be the one. Like it was, and listening to national podcasts, like the Cover 3 podcast was talking about SIU being the only guaranteed win on the schedule. Like it was really hard to pick the wins. And now I look at it, it's hard to pick the losses because again, Oklahoma State doesn't look very good. UCF doesn't look very good. Utah, somehow that looks like a very winnable game. And we got actual Ute fans on Twitter talking about how BYU would beat them by 2 touchdowns if the game was played next week. After that, Kansas doesn't look that great. Arizona State, I think, is going to be a tough one. And then Houston is kind of bad. So like 4-2 the rest of the way, especially after you've taken care of business and you've already played the toughest part of your schedule. Like is 10 wins not like, how is 10 wins not the at least the hope? I don't know, like expectation has some negative connotations to it, but like I think BYU can absolutely get there.
Yeah, I think the funniest part for me, because how you talked, expectation shift. I think a lot of expectations are built off of like history, right? Like this is what BYU's done in the past. This is what we saw last season, right? The expectations from Vegas was, under 4.5. And the thing that makes setting expectations for this season, and like I should, go even further, like the second half of this season is not only has BYU beaten expectations as far as like wins, but where they're winning, how they're winning, like based off of like
and who they're beating.
Yes, like based off of like history, it's really hard to set expectations because this is a team that had lost 10 straight day games and had never beaten a Big 12 opponent at their place. Like had to do both. They were 0-2. We talked about this earlier, like 0-2 against like teams when a national media like broadcast was there. And they won every single one of those games outside of Baylor fairly convincingly. And so like based off of history, like we hear it said all the time, like on Twitter, like, oh, I'm a BYU fan. Like they eventually find a way to let me down. Yeah, historically they have, but historically they also struggle with all these other things. And for whatever reason, it does not seem to be an issue this year. So expectation wise, I have found myself gradually like heading towards how the players are treating it, where I'm taking it as a fan week by week because I'm just having so much fun. And it very well could come to an end eventually. But when these guys are winning games the way that they are, and Connor Pay, not even 2 hours after the game, is tweeting out things like, we haven't accomplished anything yet. Or you listen to Jake Retzloff and he's immediately on the pot. Like they're like, hey, like you've really taken a step forward. Like, like, how do you feel you've contributed to the 6-0 start? And he's like, it's the team. Like, I'm not really doing much. Like, I'm just doing my job. They're doing theirs at a high level and we're winning games. And for me, like, how can you not continue to have success with that? The defense continues to play incredibly well. The offense is getting better and better each week. We just finally got LJ Martin back, and he looked good. Ropati had his struggles at the beginning of the year, and me and Joe had maybe some things that we weren't sure about when he was getting all these carries during the game. But you turn around, you look at his box score at the end of the game, like he had a good game as well. He averaged like 7 yards a carry. And so for me, my expectation moving forward is to just like enjoy it because it could very well come to an end. But it's hard not to expect a conference championship game when BYU has continued to do things that they've never done before. And they continue to accomplish things that they've never accomplished before. And yet they're remaining humble throughout the entire thing. Like, it's just one of those things where BYU football right now is just, it's like so pure. Like in a world of like NIL and star players, and you've got like Bryce Young a couple of years ago, he signed with Alabama and he got like a 2-year or $2 million deal with like Dr. Pepper and all these different things. Like it just seemed like it was going to be this giant arms race for the talent and who had the most money. And like, we love what's going on with Kevin Young for that very reason with basketball. Yet football is winning and they're undefeated and they're blowing the doors off of people with like Hunter touched on this last week, a new star every game. Like Isaiah Glasker was incredible yesterday. Like that man is putting money on tape for Sundays. And then Kingston, who was pretty quiet for the Baylor game, all of a sudden he has 2 touchdowns. He caught one, he threw one yesterday. Chase Roberts has a big game a couple of weeks ago. He's on one today. Darius Lassiter was good against Baylor. He had he did well. The running backs look great. It's just like, it's how football, like when we talk about the golden days of football, like that's what it looked like. That's what the 80s looked like. Like you had the great quarterbacks, but then you had guys around him that were making plays and doing their thing as a team. And so expectations are just keep having fun, right? Like play loose, have fun, and cheer your guts out until eventually it ends or it doesn't. Like I've rambled, but like it's just, these are just not narratives that I expected to talk about at the beginning of the season, like at all. And so if it ends, like this still may be one of my favorite seasons ever. And just because of the amount of fun that's been had in just 6 weeks. And so my expectations moving forward is just kind of slow roll this until it's over and to see how far we can take this thing.
I think you hit the fan side particularly well. I think BYU fans should really stop analyzing things, unless it's your job. Like, just enjoy the ride. It's a lot of fun. I promise you'll have a lot more fun if you do it that way. But like something that you touched on that I do want to talk about real quick is like belief, like fan belief is different from player belief, right? Fans don't believe it until they see it. They don't believe that this defense is a sound running rush defense until they see BYU's front seven stop the rush, right? Same thing with the DBs. No one's going to believe that your DBs are ball hawks that can take away the ball until you see them take away 3 interceptions in a game, right? That's the fan, that's the media, that's the outside perspective. The inside perspective is the players have to believe first before they do all of these things. They have to believe that they're capable of having 3 takeaways a game, holding teams to less than 20 points. I don't know if you realize that, but like outside of the Baylor game, no opponent has scored more than 20 points or at 20 points on us, right? That their belief existed before the first snap happened. I run the Colani Sitake show on BYU TV, and that first Colani Sitake show happened before the SIU game. And after the show, me and Colani chop it up and we just talk about whatever. But Colani told me, he said, pay attention. We're going to surprise a lot of people this year. And I'm like, that's coach speak. Oh, that's like wishful thinking. Kalani's got to say that. He needs people to be on his side. But week by week, consistently, the belief that the players had has started to come over, cross the media line and into my brain. And that's all I can think about now. So I have 100% belief that this team is going to do great things, shatter expectations, and do stuff that is unprecedented. So Trevor, I believe that people just need to sit back and enjoy the ride because they're going to see some really cool things happen. I truly believe that. I'll add this other nugget. I feel like I'm a bit of a 1984 expert. Like my dad was on the team. I know all the players. I call a lot of them uncles and aunties, right? Like those I've heard all the stories. I was even in charge of this special that we did for BYU TV for the 1984 team. It was like a roundtable event or whatever. The biggest thing that my dad always told me about that 1984 team was that they loved each other, like literally loved each other. These are old dudes, man. And you should have seen when they all came to Provo for that 1984 event in March. And it was like I was in the locker room, bro. Like all these guys are just chopping it up, laughing, talking about all these inside jokes, like some of them inappropriate, and it shocked me who they came from. But it was a lot of fun. That love, that camaraderie, that brotherhood, it's endured 40 years, right, with that team. And that was a special team. 2024, literally 40 years later, like I see those same qualities in the team right now. I see them interact in the hallways, at practices, after coaches shows, on the sidelines. They talk to each other and they treat each other with respect and love and admiration. That it makes a lot of sense that Jake Retzlaff, like when he throws a pick, the defense is like, we're gonna get it back. Don't worry about it. They're not, crapping on him or anything like that. If Hinckley fumbled this past game, the team was like, you're good, man. You're good. You saw Coach Colani like cheering him up on the sidelines. Like I know for a fact that the offense was like, you're good. Just keep, let's keep going. Let's keep going. And that's what he did. He had carries after that where I think he averaged 6 yards a carry that game or something.
It was over 7. Yeah.
7? Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's the kind of belief that is ingrained before the season happens. A belief that comes from a good culture, that comes from a good head coach, a good supporting coaching staff, and members that are bought in. And I think that's happening right now.
Well, I to go along with that, I think one of the things that comes with love is, if you love someone, you care about them enough to hold them accountable in certain areas, right? And I wish it would have looked a little bit better had Darius not dropped a couple passes after. But like you look at some of the interactions that the wide receivers have with Jake, a pass is off. And they talk about it, or maybe I saw on one play, like Jake Retzlaff was trying to get Keelan to come over in motion. He never did. They had to use a timeout. Jake went over right away, and you could tell, like, hey, when I tell you to move, you got to move. And Darius, obviously, maybe his body language is a little bit more noticeable. But I saw a couple of fans on Twitter, their immediate thought is, oh, Darius is being a diva. He could be. I mean, we're not down there, obviously, but based off of things that Jake has said, and I think more importantly, based off of the results that we see after those conversations happen, it just looks more like two teammates telling each other to just, hey, step it up a little bit more. Jake Retzlaff doesn't stop throwing at Darius after he yells at him. There's no hurt feelings there. Matter of fact, like the fact that Darius had a couple of drops before, some of the big plays that he made after that is an indication that Jake was like, okay, yeah, like I hear you. I'm actually going to feed you the ball more, and you're going to go make me a play. He had that nasty little sidestep hesitation against the Arizona guy that left him high-fiving his own teammates on the sideline. And like that to me, like that's love too. Like love your brother enough to know that he is better than what he is showing, and lift him up. And I think, like you said, with the defense too, like it goes the other way. Like the defense forces a turnover. Jacob Robinson makes one of the most athletic interceptions I've seen in a long time from any of our DBs. And what does the offense do? They score the very next play. And they did it against Kansas State too. Like they are rewarding the defense for their hard work. The defense rewarded special teams by getting a pick six at the end of the game after, Vanderhart put the ball at the half-yard line. Like it's constant, like you said, Hema, like I've got yous all across the board, and everyone's cashing in everybody's everything. And that's how you win at all three phases of football. And it's just like, and now they're getting the fans into it. Like Isaiah Glasker, I will let this die. I've already tweeted about this. I think I talked about this last week as well. We have got to get a Lavelle leap going, because after that pick six from Isaiah Glasker, I saw him running over to the fans, and I just wanted nothing more than for him to just jump up there and just start just getting freaking slapped around and cheered on by by those fans. I wanted it so bad, and I still do, just sitting here. But for him to even run over there and dap some people up, like it's just love all around, right? Like, and I think it's just nice to see. You talked about Kalani's vision and what he's wanted to do for this team, and it's finally kind of showing. I know that there's been some people, myself included, I'm not, I'm not guilt-free in this, but when you hear like love and learn or anything of that sort, it's like, okay, yeah, like rah, that's all good. It's actually, it's working, and it's working at a P4 level in a way where they're undefeated. Like they're 6-0 loving and learning. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where it is love, it's accountability, and it's successful. Like
I think that's the biggest quality that makes this team, for lack of a better term, NIL proof, right? Like, you have to have the right people that care, that are in the clubhouse, that don't really care about money, right? And don't get me wrong, we need all the NIL. Give us all the NIL. We need money. We need to spend to be able to compete with the big boys. You got to spend like a big boy. But Colani told me after the third game, which was Wyoming. After the Wyoming game, him and I were talking in the parking lot, and just like about all kinds of things. And I asked him, like, what's different, because largely this is the same team as last year, minus a couple pieces. Like, what is the biggest change in this squad from last year's squad? And he told me that, they lost a bunch of people that didn't have the collective team at the forefront of their priorities. And after parting ways with those people, the rest of the clubhouse was able to grow and learn, and the love aspect was unimpeded, right? And that's kind of what he said. He told me other stuff that we could talk about after this is off the air. But like, those kinds of things matter and make teams and programs healthier in the long run. And that's what Kalani's doing at BYU.
Well, to try and quantify what everything that you guys have talked about, like this team is one of the best BYU teams I've seen at playing complementary football since I've been a fan here. Again, just like every win BYU has had has pretty much been in all three phases kind of thing. Like, Wyoming was an all three phases win. Kansas State was one of the quintessential all three phases wins. Arizona was to some extent, but like, to your point about turnovers, like it's funny because turnovers make and break games, because they're just such large momentum swings. When your offense turns the ball over, it has the huge potential to lose you a football game because of what it does to the opposing team. This season, BYU's turned the ball over 6 times, and BYU's defense off those turnovers has allowed a total of 3 points in 6 games. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. And then flip that the other way. BYU's defense has forced 14 turnovers this season, and BYU's offense has converted that into 55 points.
That's awesome.
55-3 off of turnovers this year. And like that, but that's the making of a special team, right? Like when one side of the ball makes a play, the other side of the ball answers the bell. And when the offense struggles and, turns the ball over, Jake Ratzhoff makes, a brain dead decision against SMU, BYU's defense holds them out of the end zone. Like, there's no finger pointing. And like, I've seen that on other teams. Like I've talked to coaches on other teams, and there has, like, even among the coaching staff, there's finger pointing across the way of like, well, we're doing this and they're not. And that just, again, winning solves a lot. Like, we'll see what happens if BYU loses a game and maybe things change. But like, I just don't see that happening because both sides of the ball are just bought into each other. And we can see that bearing out in real time. Like, that's 4 points. Like, if an opposing team turns over the football, that's 4 points for BYU. That's what that's worth. And that's it's awesome. What was it? Like, my favorite stat on the defense this year so far is against Power 4 opponents. BYU has forced twice as many turnovers as touchdowns. 12 turnovers forced to 6 touchdowns allowed. That's nuts. And then when you look deeper at it, 6 of those touchdowns are offset by 2 defensive touchdowns, and then 5 of those other turnovers gave BYU the football inside the 30-yard line. So it's like it's free points. Like it's amazing how awesome this defense is played, but at the same time, it's also awesome that BYU's offense is answering the bell. We've seen, like last year, BYU's defense was as opportunistic as this one was really good at forcing turnovers, and the offense just couldn't answer. Where I feel like, again, this team just they play for each other, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. Speaking specifically about the game itself yesterday, what was your guys' biggest takeaway from the on-field performance that you think can bode well for BYU the rest of the way?
You go ahead, Trevor.
Okay, I was gonna say TJ Woods was a great hire. That's like probably one of my biggest takeaways from that game. Like having a third string center come in and look as good as he did. You've got Caleb Etienne, who last season, like speaking plainly, struggled. And having all of them, like Connor Pay coming into the season was like your captain of that offensive line. Like the most proven player, probably one of the more experienced players on that offensive line. He goes down. This is completely off topic, but the fact that he's been so I guess transparent with his injury, given what's happening in Salt Lake, has been hilarious. But anyway, I digress. Just watching them be able to step up and be as good and play as much as a unit as they have, for me, indicates success. You look at when BYU beat Utah in 2021. The thing that Kyle Whittingham took away from that game was that they got beat on both trenches. And so if you have an offensive line that can help dictate the game, and then you're finally bringing back, as we mentioned earlier, healthy running backs, that's sustainable. You can keep away from the other team, take time off the clock. You can give your defense a rest so they can continue to be dogs every time they come out onto the field. And that was my biggest takeaway yesterday, is you all of a sudden get down to your third string guy, and not only do you not really see a difference, but he's one of the better players from that game. And to me, it shows depth, and it also shows that there is proper technique and care being taught to each and every one of these players, that the third string guy comes in, he knows his assignment, he knows what he's doing, and he's able to do it the same as the first string captain. And that to me was something that not only feels sustainable, but is something that is going to ultimately lead to a lot of success in this back half of the season.
I think that's a great pick. I'll pick something different, but before I do, I'll share a story related to that TJ Woods hire. So middle of the season last year, I had a prominent piece on the offensive line on one of my shows. And after the show, we started talking about the frustrations of the O-line play at that time and feelings that he was having about it all. And he talked about how he's like, there's no scheme. Me and the other captains on the team and the others on the O-line are drawing up the schemes ourselves. We're doing this all by ourselves. Our coach, our line coach, is not helping us, is basically what he said. Okay. And after that, you can see we hired TJ Woods. Colani was able to get him onto the staff. We see the instant improvement. I think Etienne is a great example of the change immediately that we saw in the first couple of games of the season, right? But then, having Connor Pay go out and having Mitchell step in is a great example of the health of this offensive line is great. So I thought another piece that was really good was I was curious to see how the defense was going to play T-Mac and Fafita, because they bring a very curious style of play, right? Fafita is best when he's off schedule, outside of the pocket, extending. And T-Mac, I would argue, is also phenomenal. He's phenomenal at all the other stuff, but when it's off schedule, he finds the open spaces. That's how they're able to chop up really good defenses like Utah. And so I was curious to see how they would play that. The like scheme I saw that the defense was doing was like a kind of like crush technique where like we did bring heat a lot of the on a lot of plays, don't get me wrong. But like they would design it by like kind of just forming a pocket around Fafita to try to keep him in there. And then hopefully Fafita gets impatient and throws an errant ball, right? But you're asking for a lot for your DBs to go man for so long. And I was curious to see how that would play out. We saw a couple of our linebackers like within that crush technique, like Glasker, for example. I saw him totally whiff on Fafita one time where Fafita just like rolled out past him. And I was like, that can't happen anymore. And he shored that up and became, probably the best player on the defense in that game. So BYU is week by week constantly showing me that they're like improving and taking lessons from the games previous, but also showing that like they can do things more than once, right? After the K-State game or even the Wyoming game, we ran back a touchdown and I was like, that's never going to happen again for another 30 years, right? And then they show that they can do it again, and then they show that they can get the ball out on defense, and they show that they can make other spectacular that pinning him on the one from that punt. It was crazy. Like they show me time and time again that they can redo it. They can replicate the magic that we've seen previously. And that's another takeaway from this game, I thought, that bodes well for the rest of the season, is that it's not a one and done thing. We could very well run back another punt or kick in the next few games, like I have a confidence that we can replicate these things that we've done. And that's a sure sign of like a healthy team.
Well, after the Kansas State game, a lot of the narrative around BYU, like on a national scale, is like, oh, that's a cute win. But like the true data nerds were talking about that, like, oh, that was a fluke. Like that won't. There's things in that game that happened that won't happen again. They happen again against Arizona. Like people, and like I've heard people say before, like I might be building a straw man here, but what happens to BYU when they don't force multiple turnovers in a game? I'm just not sure I see that happening. Like
Kanye West, I guess you'll never know.
I guess we'll never know. Like this BYU defense has been so aggressive and so opportunistic. They've been generating so much pressure. Like every Noah Fafita turnover yesterday was generated by pressure. And BYU has done such a great job of applying that this year that I just like looking at the rest of the schedule. What quarterback do you think is not going to throw an interception against this defense? You got freshman Garrett Rangel starting for Oklahoma State this week in a night game at Lavelle Edwards Stadium for his first start. Good luck with that. Was that Garrett Rangel who's the
no, but it's just the meme where like the
Oklahoma State quarterback.
Yeah.
KJ Jefferson was bad and they just benched him. Cam Rising, Isaac Wilson, what's the difference?
Who cares? Yeah.
Like the rest of the year, it's just like every quarterback that BYU is going to play is turnover prone. Every offense BYU is going to play is going to be forced into mistakes. And again, like the other crazy thing is like 52 of those points that the offense has put up off of turnovers has been in the last 3 weeks. Like if the offense maintains that, it's hard to see BYU losing a football game because BYU is going to have opportunities. I wanted to circle back to your point about Caleb Etienne. Caleb Etienne is kind of the microcosm for how awesome the coaching job has been this year for this BYU team. Caleb Etienne was unplayable last year. On PFF, he was the 45th ranked player on the BYU offense. There's only 11 that can play at any given time, and he was ranked 45th. Right now, he's 10th. He's the best offensive lineman in terms of pass blocking, according to PFF. Like, dare I say BYU is going to have a fourth NFL offensive tackle? Like, who knows? But he has been awesome this year. Hema, you're the BYU historian. This is the best coaching job at BYU since when? Because to your point, the coaching, like what I mean, but what I'm getting at here is the coaching staff decided we had a 5-win team last year and we're just going to run it back. They like on offense, the offense was awful last year. And their answer to that was adding Austin Liausa out of the portal. And that's it. On defense was like awful last, like the vibes were better, but like 91st in yards per play. Their answer was to go add Mark Collins, who was kind of a journeyman FCS cornerback who'd been hurt most of his career, and Jack Kelly, who's obviously awesome, but like that was your answer to fixing the defense, was 2 Weber State transfers. And they are now the 8th or like 6th ranked defense in yards per play. That's like a 85 spot jump with the same roster. Like it's not like they just like rebuilt the roster out of the transfer portal. It's the same group. That like this has got to be one of the best coaching jobs in BYU history. And I'm curious, like, if you can think of one that's better.
It's hard. It's hard to say, right? Because like in the 80s, like there was a lot of legendary coaches that kind of turned through there. And it was all credit to Lavelle bringing those guys in, like Mike Holmgren or Norm Chow. Like these are just great coaches, great minds that, were here for a little bit, moved on to the NFL and stuff like that. But BYU kept winning through all that. So I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. But I will say this. I will say that, like, going back to like what we were saying about the team believing first before playing a snap of college football, a lot of criticism was out there, even, among analysts that I talked to and spent time with, and criticizing BYU for not picking up a running back out of the portal. And that's like another good example of like the belief within the program where the coaches actually were like, "No, we're good. I think we have a solid stable of running backs." And they maybe learned from things last year and adjusted the way that they block things. And they rolled with the same running back room that they had last year, and look at how they've performed without LJ Martin, without Hinckley Ropati, like other running backs who we'd never even heard of, really, shining in several games this season. And so I don't know the answer to your question about like how good is this coaching staff, like who are they comparable to, but I think at the end of the season this very well might be the best coaching staff ever if BYU reaches heights that they haven't reached in a long time.
You guys are not prepared for what I will do if BYU makes a Big 12 championship game in their first year.
I think. Oh God.
In their second. Hema and I were kind of talking about it a little bit before the game. I probably shouldn't share this, but I asked him like, how many losses would you trade for a win today? And Hema didn't give me a straight answer. I didn't need, like, BYU didn't need one. Like BYU doesn't need to trade losses for wins this season because they're just going to get the job done. It doesn't matter what TV window or who the opponent is. BYU by $1 billion, as always.
There's a certain juice around the program, I think. And me, like in my role and what I know and like the analysis that I go through, like I try to pick every game that goes by. I think, okay, what was the worst? Like, what does BYU need to improve for next game? And so, what are the benchmarks in this next game that I need to see? And every week, BYU hits them. And after this Arizona game, I'm not quite sure like what is left to improve. Like big picture things, right? Like a good example is like SMU, like this offense really needs to figure out like how to keep themselves on the field. And then Wyoming, they did that, right? Wyoming, I don't know. I felt like maybe like we needed to be more judicious with like how we used our timeouts, things like that. And like Kansas State, it almost didn't matter because we freaking blew the doors off them. Like there's little things that they've BYU's been improving on week by week. And after this Arizona game, let's just spitball right now. What do you think is like the next benchmark? So what I would do is I would say, okay, when we play Oklahoma State at home, like what are some things that BYU needs to clean up, or what would you like to see more of? Like maybe I'd like to see more of a balanced offense, maybe like more quick passes and like marching down the field that way. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I need to see at least one game this season with a completion percentage over 70%. Like 70% is a huge number. So far this season, Jake Retzloff's adjusted completion percentage, so that's like adjusted for drops. I think he's like it's around 60% this year. His adjusted completion percentage is 71%, which means that like Jake Retzloff is throwing some catchable balls that just haven't BYU's receivers just haven't come down with them every single time. I need to see a game where BYU can put together a passing attack for a full game against a Power 5 opponent, because we haven't seen that. Like first half against Baylor was incredible. Jake Retzloff had almost 200 yards passing, and then they completely fell off a cliff in the second half. Even a little bit against Arizona, BYU had, I think it was like 250 yards of offense in the first half, and they ended up with less than 400 for the game. Like that's something that I have to see more of, is more consistency in both halves in the passing game that I think we just haven't seen. Like Jake's got off to some really hot starts and has just fallen off late in games. And so I think that's the next thing. And Oklahoma State, to kind of begin our preview of that, is there's going to be a chance for that.
Okay. So I'll do you one better real quick before Trevor gets his in. I think one thing BYU is really good at, the offensive coordination is really good at, is scripting the beginning of games. They do very, very well on script, right? So when BYU comes out, if they get the ball first, their first few plays are like pretty methodical. There's like a rhyme and reason to everything. And then second quarter comes and they still do pretty well, but they're getting off script at this point, right? It's now if they're calling plays, reacting to what the defense is showing them, right? And then after the second half, it's completely reactionary as far as the offense goes, because the defense has already done some, little tweaks here or there at halftime to try to like shore up their defense. The opponents are. And so BYU tends to have a rougher time in the second half trying to adjust to the readjustments, right? So maybe something that we'd like to see, obviously that completion percentage we'd like to see higher, but maybe we need to see off-script play calling maybe be a little bit better, reacting to what the defense is giving to you and calling the right plays to match up with that. Trevor, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think Joel Klatt, which, I mean, we don't even have time to get into how magical it was to have Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt call a BYU game, but he put it a lot more eloquently than I probably will. But he kind of pointed out, like, at the end of the game, BYU, like the run game at they had gained, like, it was like 5.4 or like 5.7 yards per carry to end the game. And he had just kind of pointed out that, like, when you're watching that game, and like as he was watching that game, he was actually kind of surprised when he looked down and saw that number. But he pointed out that the reason why that happens, like when you're watching a game and like they're running, but it's like there's not these huge gains, but then you look down and you realize like the yards per carry is actually really good. It's because the offensive line, which we talked about earlier, is playing a good scheme and like they're performing well. So what I would like to see is, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, I would like to see kind of our running back 1, running back 2. So like LJ Martin, Hinckley, if Sione Moa is going to get more touches, great, like him as well. I would like to start seeing them kind of reward some of that good blocking. I mean, they each had a run of, like, I think Joe, you pointed this out at the game, like they each had a run over 15 yards, which is great. But like, I want them to start hitting more cutback lanes. Like I want to see them start making people miss, break a couple more tackles, and start turning those rushes of 15 into rushes of like 45. Like we've yet to hit a home run like with the run game yet. And that, to me, I think needs to be the next thing that I would like to see take a step forward. The offensive line's good. The running backs are healthier. And so now, with your health, go and do something about it. We know that LJ can hit the home run. He did it against Arkansas. He did it against Texas Tech. Ropati's had big games and big gains before. So that, to me, I think is just the next step. The offensive line is going to be fine behind Bruce Mitchell. So now it's time for the running backs to kind of pay that off, play more of that complementary football like we talked about earlier.
To again put some numbers to it, Trevor, BYU has had one run this season of over 25 yards.
Yeah, we need to house one.
Really specific question for you, Hema, before we give our hot takes and predictions for Oklahoma State. BYU is 13th in the AP poll. What is your reaction?
Yeah, I believe I tweeted, "What the fuck is this shit?"
Sorry for sorry for the young audience.
If it's a young audience, you should be in bed by now. Okay,
For sure.
No, we're never gonna get the respect. BYU is never gonna get the respect that they deserve. It's just how it is. I don't think, unless we win the Heisman in the next few years, like there's not gonna be attention and eyes on the program. That said, the AP poll is kind of nonsense. There's a lot of trash that goes around in there. Like, I don't think a lot of these people are watching all the games. Being a West Coast team is also difficult, so I understand all this stuff. But someone please explain to me how Notre Dame losing to a MAC school is ahead of BYU. That's just like off the top of my head, right? Like, I could really look at this thing and break it down. There's no reason, like no 2-loss schools should be in this like list. Like, it's crazy to me. And so that is my take. I'm starting to get fired up. I'd already forgotten about this AP poll, and now I feel kind of annoyed again.
Well, it's not like 2020 where like people could point at like, well, who has BYU played? BYU also has like they've got like the best resume in college football too. I'm breaking my own rule here because, to be frank, like if we just enjoy each week and BYU manages to win out, it's not really going to matter. Like, we're going to end up in, like, if we go undefeated, we win the conference championship game. Like, heck, even making the conference championship game and maybe dropping that one, we probably get the at-large, like one of the at-larges for the college football playoff. Like, it's not really going to matter. But when the requirements before for putting BYU where they were was they haven't played anyone, is now like you have no leg to stand on, and yet you still put them there. Like, that's when it gets really bothersome. And you end up, like you said, Hems, like, what the F is this?
Who cares?
Well, ESPN put out an article. I need to find the specific text of it, but it talked about like why BYU could or couldn't make the playoff. And one of the reasons it said they couldn't was like, well, BYU almost lost to a 4-loss Baylor team. And it said, and I quote, and wins against SIU and Wyoming could hold them back even more. Meanwhile, Notre Dame said outside of a loss to NIU, like the sentence needed to stop there, but they were talking about like Notre Dame being a legit at-large team while BYU is getting dinged for beating Northern Illinois and Wyoming, as if other teams don't play G5 and FCS games too. It's
not even a quality loss.
I think the solution to BYU's respect issue on a national scale is lose 4 games a season and lose a high quality bowl game twice. And that's how you get respect in the rankings.
We all put Pop-Tart emojis in our bios. It's going to be fantastic.
Exactly. Hot takes and predictions for Oklahoma State. We don't have a ton of time for a preview, but long story short, Oklahoma State came into the season looking like one of the toughest games on the schedule. They've completely fallen off a cliff. Mostly because their offense has been abysmal. Their offensive line in particular has been really, really bad. They have a Heisman Trophy candidate, Heisman Trophy quality running back in Ollie Gordon. I'm not sure if he's actually going to be available this week. There's been some talk about him being injured, which would be absolutely insane. But even so, Ollie Gordon has not been very effective this year because of that offensive line. Their defense is one of the worst in the country. In yards, forgive me as I look up this stat on the fly. In terms of yards per play, Oklahoma State is 110th in the country in yards per play defense at 6.5. This is another big opportunity. I think this is the worst defense BYU's played so far. It's going to be cold and maybe rainy, which doesn't bode well for offense, but I think I'll be a little disappointed if BYU doesn't put up 30 for a fifth straight game. What say you?
Yeah, this is going back to you obviously mentioned them bringing in freshman quarterback. His first real live action is going to be LaVell Edwards Stadium at 8:15, like night game.
Poor kid.
And so far, the list of quarterbacks who have been unable to handle it include Avery Johnson, who has been incredible outside of games playing a team named BYU. It wasn't at LES, but like Preston Stone, like got benched, and he was a potential Heisman candidate coming into this year. Jennings, who's looked amazing outside of, again, teams named BYU, and Noah Fafita, who has NFL aspirations. Like they weren't up to the task. That's the bar that the stadium and this defense has set. And I don't know. I'm not gonna say like he can't handle it. Like we've seen backup quarterbacks go off against BYU before, but that's the bar. Like that's where you have to be, and it still wasn't enough. So really, what does it take to beat BYU at home? Like, does he have to be Aaron Rodgers? Does he have to be the next Patrick Mahomes? Like, I'm not sure. Like, we don't know what the bar is. We don't know what the bar is, but it's really high. And so I have, you talked to Hems earlier about belief. Like, I believe that the crowd's going to be ready and this defense is going to be ready for whatever they throw at them. You take out Ollie Gordon, and now I'm really kind of wondering where the offense comes from, right? Because Ollie Gordon was the reason they came back last season. Like he had 4 rushing touchdowns, and they were all in the second half and overtime. Like I just none of what I'm saying is that this should be a cakewalk. Because that's when we start writing checks that the karma gods take into account and then throw it out into the universe, like bad things happen. I'm just curious to see where the offense comes from with Oklahoma State. It very well could come from this quarterback, but I just don't know what's required to beat this defense when they're aided by 63,000 of their closest friends. And so that for me is something that we can control. The listeners of this podcast, us, like bring the juice like you have all season and set a high bar for what it takes to beat BYU at home, because the defense is going to take care of business.
I think any team that plays BYU is going to have to play a perfect game, and that's pretty unlikely, I think, with this Oklahoma State squad. That said, freshman quarterback have put up numbers against us in the past, like that Josh Hoover kid. Josh, I think is his name, the TCU quarterback. It's like unbelievable, right? So I'm not going to say it can't happen, but like it unlikely won't. I don't see him playing a perfect game in LaVell Edwards Stadium. Even if he doesn't turn the ball over, they'll probably rack up the penalty yards because of the home field advantage. So I really don't see a way that BYU loses this unless the wheels completely fall off. And I don't think the wheels are going to fall off. In fact, I'm willing to say that Jake Retzloff is going to throw for like 300 yards plus.
All right, there we go. Coming in strong. He knows how to do it. My prediction, I'm going to actually say 30. I think 34-17 BYU, weather permitting. There's always a chance that this could be if the weather's bad, it could be a Boise State game where BYU all of a sudden gets a case of the drops. But anything short of that, I think BYU is just a better team than Oklahoma State right now, which again feels crazy to say given where we thought both teams would be preseason. But my hot take, in line with Hema's, I'm going to say Jake Retzloff over 60. I'm going to say over 66% completion percentage.
Okay. 69%?
Yeah, sure. 69%. We'll go with that.
That would be nice. Well, Joe, who do I want to give a touchdown to this week?
Trevor's been on. So Hema, I'm not sure, you probably haven't listened to the show a ton. Trevor for the last 2 years has kind of been like the kiss of death. Anytime he predicts a specific player to do something for their hot take, they get injured. In Dallin Holker's case, he left the roster.
Left. Okay.
And one listener said that it was his fault that Jake Retzloff threw the pick at the end zone because he predicted an Aiden Robbins touchdown in that game. But Trevor's been on a heater this year. I think he's 6-0. He's 6-0. So who is he going to bless this year?
Let me burn some sage real quick.
Yeah. Ew. I think with all the mentions on Twitter of him being a diva, I think Darius Lassiter is going to get in the end zone again this week. So I'm going to say Darius Lassiter 100 yards and a touchdown.
Darius Lassiter legacy game. Let's go. Score predictions from you both.
I'll go 45-7.
Wow.
Oh my!
I love it.
To quote Gus Johnson, "Whoa!"
we finally break the 40-point curse. Again, for the uninitiated, BYU had not scored more than 40 points in a game since 2021. And I absolutely lost it when Isaiah Glasker took that pick to the end zone, because BYU was taking a knee so many times in the red zone when 40 points was on the table, and they just refused to do it. And Isaiah Glasker said, "Not today." And I love it. Okay. 45-7. Love that. Trevor.
35-13 is going to be my take there. I think the most of the Big 12 teams have found at least one drive where they've been able to score, and then there's been a couple of field goals. So 35-13 is something I feel pretty good about.
Go Cougs, man. Cougs by $1 billion on Friday.